This is Jed Distler, and welcome to The Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. Happy New Year to you all, and welcome to the first episode in our second season. You can now find the Piano Maven podcast on Substack, where a paid subscription to my Substack page enables you and I to chat about all things related to the piano and piano recordings and piano topics and, well, everything about the piano. And you also will receive invitations to participate in live Zoom chats where we will share listening experiences and sometimes we will host special guests. So please consider a paid subscription to my Piano Maven Substack by visiting the link provided in the episode description, which is https:// then 2 slashes going to the right, Jed Distler Music, that's all one word, JEDDISTLERMUSIC.substack.com. You will be glad you subscribed. So we're going to begin our second season with a mini-series where I'm going to go through all 32 Beethoven piano sonatas, and I'm going to recommend 2 recordings for each sonata. This is an idea that stems back to the pandemic when we were living in uncertainty and we were disinfecting our mail and we were shooting up Clorox. No, I wasn't doing that. But anyway, a fellow piano maven friend of mine challenged me to come up with a list of recommended recordings for each of the 32 Beethoven sonatas, but without repeating one single pianist. In other words, I could not nominate a pianist for more than one sonata. So I thought, okay, very well. Since all of my concerts were canceled, I have tons of time on my hands now. So let me dig through my collection and see if I could face up to this challenge, or rather this dare. And not only did I manage to come up with 32 different pianists for 32 Beethoven sonatas, but I also came up with a sub-list of so-called historic recordings. So I wound up with 2 lists: the historic list, meaning recordings from the 78 RPM era or mono LP era, or live concert or radio broadcast recordings made for archival purposes, but subsequently issued or made available publicly in some way, shape, or form. And then my second list consisted of stereo or digital commercial recordings, and these could also be live, but only if they were commercial in nature and not primarily archival, in other words, intended for public release. So here was the hard part. I did not allow myself to use the same pianist twice on either list. So that means we're going to be talking about a total of 32 sonatas and 64 pianists, 64 performances. And I had to try to do this with no weak links so far as the performances were concerned. And I think I've done a fairly good job of that, as you will see as this mini-series transpires. But on these lists, I've tried really hard to represent as wide an overview of Beethoven pianists as possible, encompassing more than a whole century's worth of interpretive options. And as it turned out, with one exception, all of these performances that I will be recommending in these podcasts have either been commercially available or available through free websites like archive.org or IMSLP. I think only one performance you have to seek out the LP, which has probably not been digitized somewhere outside of some news group or something. But let's get to the music. And for this first episode, I'm going to talk about recordings of Beethoven's first three piano sonatas, Opus 2, numbers 1, 2, and 3. And even with this early opus number, Opus 2, you somehow know right away that you are dealing with a composer who's a master of form, a master of concision, and a composer who fused form and content like few other composers have in the history of classical music. The Sonata number 1 in F minor, Opus 2 number 1, is in 4 movements, and for my historic performance choice, the recording by Arthur Schnabel really remains a knockout. He throws himself into the outer movements with such hurling brio and intensity as if his life depended on it. One could imagine Beethoven at the keyboard improvising and foaming at the mouth, just coming out with this music out of nowhere. It's like a bucking bronco racing out from the starting gate, the way Schnabel plays this piece. My modern recommendation for Opus 2 number 1 comes from the Beethoven cycle for the EMI label by the pianist Stephen Kovacevic, and I think he matches Schnabel in nearly every way. I mean, there's no courtly or prim-sounding minuet from him. For the Piano Sonata number 2 in A major, Opus 2 number 2, I've picked for my historic performance choice a mono recording from the 1950s with the French pianist Robert Casadei-Su. I like his interpretation because of its leanness and its sense of bite and its transparency and freedom from any sentimentality at all. I also like these similar qualities and an even more inflected and linearly aware interpretation by Bruce Hungerford, the Australian pianist who began recording a complete Beethoven cycle for the Vanguard label in the 1970s. He never finished the cycle because he lost his life in a car crash in January 1977 when he was killed by a drunk driver. So his Beethoven cycle, although it remains incomplete, is absolutely priceless. Let's go now to the sonata in C major, Opus 2 number 3. And my historic choice probably will not surprise many of you piano mavens. Arturo Benedetti Michelangeli had one of the smallest public repertoires among all great pianists, and he tended to play the same pieces time and time again. He only recorded 3 of Beethoven's sonatas commercially. In 1941, when he was 21, he recorded the C major, Opus 2, number 3 sonata for HMV. And even if some of Michelangeli's faster playing borders on being glib, he already displays amazing evenness and control. And these qualities really matter in a composition that does have a lot of virtuoso display in it. By contrast, my modern era stereo choice for this sonata is a recording by Arthur Rubinstein. His Beethoven is more urbane and eloquent, in contrast to the angular, edgy style one associates with Schnabel and his pupils, for example. But the freshness and the youthful ardor that Rubinstein projects belies the fact that he was in his mid-70s when he made this recording. I remember the first time I heard it, it was on the radio, and David Duvall had a program on WNCN, the long-gone New York radio station where he was music director. And he had a series of programs where he was comparing different pianists in Beethoven sonatas. And I remember that he played the Opus 2 number 3 first movement. He played it in a recording first with the 20-something Daniel Barenboim. And then he played the same movement with Rubinstein in this recording. And then David Duvall asks which of the two pianists sounded younger or older. I did enjoy both recordings, but I did remember that Rubinstein seemed to have a little more kick in his step or fire in his belly. Actually, if you compare the finale, you know what I'm talking about, Rubinstein really takes a wonderful dash and plays with a lot of brio. I mean, the word brio always comes up when I talk about Beethoven. You always see allegro con brio, right, in his scores. But I think this Rubinstein recording is one of the very best versions of Opus 2 number 3 out there. This is Jed Disler, and I thank you for listening to The Piano Maven and for all of your support. And again, please consider a Substack subscription. I think you will be glad that you did. And I look forward to being with you tomorrow as we talk about Beethoven's Sonata Opus 7.